Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. In the davening and the Kiddush on Shavuot, we mentioned that Shavuot says Man Matan Torasenu. The Gemara tells us, the Mishnah tells us in Maseches Titus that the two jolliest days of the year, in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, used to be Chamishas B'Av and Yom Kippurim. The girls would dance and they would make shidduchim with the boys. So the Gemara says, Yom Kippur, we understand why it's a very jolly day, because it's the day of Kabbalah Satorah. Since when is Yom Kippur the day of Kabbalah Satorah? According to our tradition, when Moshe Rabbeinu smashed the luchos, and Rabban Shalom told them to prepare another set of luchos, he went up to Har Sinai again. So he came down the second time with the luchos shniyos on Yom Kippurim. So the Gemara seems to say that we have 2 days on which we celebrate Kabbalah Satorah, Shavuot and Yom Kippur. So the Gedolim from 150 years ago discussed this question: what do you need 2 holidays for Kabbalah Satorah? So they explain, one is for Kabbalah Torah Shebichsav and one is Kabbalah Torah Shebal Peh. And it's not just because there are 2 Yom Tovim and there are 2 parts to the Torah, so they said this is for that and that's for that. No, they explained why. So the Beis Halevi, Rabbi Yosheber Soloveitchik, that was the father of Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. He was Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin for quite a while, together with the Netziv. Beis Halevi has a whole essay on this, and he explains as follows: the Midrashim and the Zohar, and even the Gemara a little bit, seem to imply that on the Luchos Rishonos, on the first set of the Luchos, not only were the Aseres Adivos engraved, if you look in between the lines, you can find Kol HaTorah Kula. The original plan was that there wasn't going to be any need for any Torah Shebal Peh. Everything would be able to be found on the Luchas. But after the Chet HaEgel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was geyser that the Jewish people should be punished. We deserve to sit. The whole nation worshipped Avodah Zarah. So part of the punishment was, originally the plan was that the Jewish people would be the Am HaNivchar, and no other nation would ever be Sholet, would have control over the Jews. We would be on top of the world. But because of the Chet HaEgel, that's why we were punished throughout all the generations. And the punishment that the Jewish people suffered during the Second World War, such a Shoah. So the Pasuk in Chumash says, "B'yom Paktei Pakadati." This is all. Doesn't have to be a punishment for what they did in Europe before the war. It was still a punishment for the days of the Chet HaEgel. So the part of the punishment was that we would be under the shlita of the Ha'olam. And the Pasuk in Navi says, the Gemara quotes this Pasuk, "Echtev al rubei tayrasi halok amozanech shavu." The Rebbe Shalom says, if I'm going to have Kol HaTorah Kula written, Biksav, then the Jewish people will lose their status as the Yam HaNivchar. The Mesorah will be able to claim that they are the Yam HaNivchar. That's exactly what happened when the Jewish people rejected Jesus. So the Christians said that we lost our status as the Yam HaNivchar, and we're all going to burn in Gehenna. And they claim that they are the Yam HaNivchar. They've been claiming this for quite a while. In fact, we spoke about it, I think, in one of the yeshivas on Friday. When I visited the yeshiva, it came up. For over 100 years, since the beginning of the Zionist movement, so the Catholic press all over the world, they have newspapers in French and in Spanish and in Latin and in English all over the world. Their reaction to the Zionist movement was, it's never going to go up the ground, never going to happen, it's impossible. According to their imams, according to their religion, the Jews lost their status as Am HaNivchar. They claim they're the Am HaNivchar because they did accept Jesus. And Eretz Yisrael is the Eretz HaNivcheres for the Am HaNivchar. So it's never going to happen that the Jews will take over or have shlit over Eretz Yisrael. This is they were publishing for years. The wife of one of the rabbeim in YU got her doctorate. That was her doctoral dissertation. She collected all the newspaper articles in all over the world in all the different languages, and she presented this was the position of the Catholic Church. And then when Hakamas Hamdina occurred, and in 1948, so they had a kasha. So they covered up. So they said, well, the Jews have modern Israel, but they don't have the real Eretz Israel. They don't have Yerushalayim. They don't have Har HaBayis. and they don't have Ir Ha'avot, they don't have Hebron, that they're never going to have. That's what they kept on saying. Never going to have that. That's according to their Gläubigen, according to their belief. It cannot be. The Jews lost their status as the Am HaNivcha. Then, Mohammed Sheshet HaYamim, the Jewish people took over Har HaBayis, and they took over Hebron. That was with Nisim and the Flores, they took over Hebron. One person went into Hebron and took over, no army. One person went, the Arabs were so petrified, Rabbi Goren. It's a fantastic story. You should read his autobiography. Fantastic story. So when they took over Har HaBayis and took over Hebron, so the Teretz was upgefregt, the Teretz. So the day after Mohammed Sheshet HaYamim, the Pope said, whoever spoke at that time, I forgot already, he said, he thinks they should internationalize Yerushalayim. Why do you have to make an international city? Because it's a tiyufta against their belief. They were saying for years and years and years, never going to happen. The Jews will never have shlita over Yerushalayim because we lost our status as a Am HaNivcha. And every year, at least once a year, the Pope, after him, every Pope would say for many, many years, now they already stopped, the Pope would say for many years, they should internationalize the city, Yerushalayim. Now they finally realize that the whole religion is baloney. So now they stopped already. Now they say they divide the world into three groups. They have the real Mamidim, the real Catholics. They're the real Am HaNivcha. The Jews go to Gan Eden even though they don't believe, even though they're not the Am HaNivcha. And the rest of the world are of the Avodah Zarah. And then when the Rabbanim and the Yeshiva, a whole group of cardinals used to come every year and a half or so to visit America. So for many years they would always come and meet only with the Reform and the Conservative. The Orthodox never wanted to have any shaykhs with them. So after many years of meeting with the Reform and the Conservatives, so they came to the realization they don't really represent Judaism. So they said they want to meet Daka with the Orthodox. So the first year that they came to meet with the Orthodox, so they visited Wayu, Tervadas, Yankel Yosef, Chaim Berlin, Lubavitch, Satman. They visited all the different groups. Somehow Wayu gave them the nicest reception. So after that, they only came to Wayu. So they would come every year and a half, a group of cardinals would come. So this is the way they present. They divide the whole world into three groups. The real Am HaNivcha, the Catholics. The Jews are the twin religion. They consider we go to Gan Eden. They don't understand why, but they have no brera. And the rest of the Avodah said, want to know whether we also divide the world into three divisions. So the Rabbanim and the Yeshiva said, no, we divide the world into two. The Jewish people and the Catholics are of the Avodah Zarah, together with everybody else. The Rabbanim told them that. I was there when they were explaining it to them. So the Medrash says, after the Chet HaEgel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was geyser to punish the Jewish people, there will be Tachas Shlita Umas Ha'olam. So the Nachron, the Umas Ha'olam, will be able to take over the whole Torah Shebechsav. They'll be able to claim that they are the Am HaNivcha. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided, Plan B, you have to change the plan. It has to be a Torah Shebal Peh, which the Umas Ha'olam do not have any Shlita over. They're supposed to be only for the Jews. Unfortunately now, Art Scroll keeps on put out the whole Talmud, and the Vatican has a standing order. Every time they put out another volume of the Torah Shebal Peh, the Vatican gets 18 copies and they study it. So they have the whole Torah Shebal Peh also. But by now it doesn't make a difference. Now they already know that the Jews are the balabatim over the Torah Shebal Peh. So the reason why the Torah Shebal Peh was given in order to emphasize the fact that the Israel are unique. If the Kol HaTorah Kula would be Torah Shebechsav, then the Jewish people will lose their uniqueness. We won't be able to claim that we don't have anything that they don't have. They'll claim that they are the Am HaNivcha. We know historically, they have essays about this. There was a period of time, quite a period of time, that on Yom Kippur, the Orthodox Jews in Alexandria used to have a parade in support of the Torah Shebal Peh. They were fighting against the Karoim. So on Yom Kippur is the day of Kabbalah's Torah Shebal Peh. So they have, like Chabad has a parade in New York, they have a parade on Lag Baimer to demonstrate that they support study of the Zohar. Lag Baimer has something to do with Reb Shimon. We're not sure exactly what, but it has something to do. So that's why Lubavitch has a parade on Lag Baimer. So that's why in Alexandria the Jews had a parade. The rabbinic Jews, those who follow the Torah Shebal Peh, as opposed to the Karoim. So they used to have a parade on Yom Kippur. We begin Yom Kippur with Kol Nidre, very unclear. Why do you begin with Kol Nidre? What is the shaykhs? So different explanations are given. And in some of the history books they suggest, because the Mishnah says that Het and Nedarim, the Mishnah at the end of the first parak in Chagiga says, Het and Nedarim, will be make HaToras and Nedarim, you can be in a bezin and say, Mutalach, 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 Het and Nedarim, Percha Ba'avir, Ve'elam Ameshi Yismocha means that there are different parts to the Torah Shabbat Peh. We'll soon talk about it. The Rambam writes in the Hagdamah, the Pirush HaMishnayis, the Mishnah constitutes the whole Torah Shabbat Peh, and he says there are 5 different parts. So one part of the Torah Shabbat Peh is those dinim that are purely halacha and Moshe Sinai. And the Rambam gives you the full, what he considers the full list of halacha and Moshe Sinai in the Hagdamah to the Pirush HaMishnayis. Very small list, not so long. Let's say that tefillin have to be square and the tefillin have to be painted black. There's no way to read it in between the lines and the Chumash. That's purely Torah Shabbat Peh. So that's what the Mishnah says about Het and Nedar Perchem Ba'avir, like sound waves float in the air. There's no way to read it in between the lines and the Chumash. It's purely Torah Shabbat Peh, transmitted from generation to generation. All the Tanoim and the Gemara there in the end of the first parak Chagiga disagree with the Mishnah. Tanoim disagree with me, saying, no, Yesh Lam Al Meshi Yismochu. The din of Heter HaToras and Nedarim is based by reading in between the lines. That's another area. The Rambam has 5 different parts to the Torah Shabbat Peh. So when you read in between the lines, how can we believe HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictated the Chumash to Moshe Rabbeinu word for word, letter for letter? That's why the Gemara will sometimes learn out a din from the fact that the word is spelled Molei Achoseh. Tahor is usually spelled Tes Hei Vav Reish, and once in a long while spelled Tes Hei Reish. So the Gemara has a din based on that. The word Na'ara is usually spelled in Chumash Nun Ayin Reish. Once in a while spelled Nun Ayin Reish. Hey, the Gemara has a drasha. Why is it spelled over there Nun Ayin Reish? The din is different over there because it's spelled Molei. The word Kadosh, Kadoshim Tehil Kekodesh Ani. Kedoshim is spelled without a vav, Kekodesh Ani is spelled with a vav. So the Tanoim have a comment on that. Why the word spelled sometimes with a vav, sometimes without a vav? There's a whole sefer 100 years ago. A Rav from Germany, I don't remember who it is, but I have a copy of the sefer at home. It's, the name didn't strike a bell by me. He put out a whole sefer quoting all the Gemaras where they have halachas based on Molei and Chosem. We believe the Torah was dictated, the whole Chumash was dictated to Moshe Rabbeinu word for word, letter for letter. So the Tanoim, Darshan, Psukim, how come this word is spelled Molei sometimes spelled Chosem? So the practice began, apparently, Yom Kippur is the Yom Tov when we celebrate Kabbalah's Torah Shabbat Peh. Because after the Chet HaEgel, Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Luch Shniyas on Yom Kippur, so that's when we celebrate Kabbalah's Torah Shabbat Peh. So to demonstrate that it's the day of celebration of Kabbalah's Torah Shabbat Peh, we start with HaToras and Nedarim, which is pure Torah Shabbat Peh. According to the Mishnah, you can't even read it in between the lines. Not that part of Torah Shabbat Peh. You read in between lines, purely transmitted orally, sound waves. Porchem ba'avir. Heter Nedarim porchem ba'avir. Ve'elam Meshi Yismocha. There's no text at all. We celebrate on Yom Kippur, we celebrate the Kabbalah of the Torah Shabbat Peh. What exactly was the need? It's interesting, Rav Soloveitchik used to say, when he said over this essay from the Beis HaLevi, he would add, we know that the Avodah Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol had to do the whole Hakrovas HaKarbanos on Yom Kippur, so it was divided into 5 units. The first unit, the Kohen Gadol had to wear the Big Day Zov. The second unit, he wears Big Day Lavan. The third unit, Big Day Zov. Fourth unit, Big Day Lavan. The fifth unit, again, Big Day Zov. In the Chumash, it doesn't say like that. In the Chumash, it's as if the whole Avodah is divided into 3 units. Big Day Zov, Big Day Lavan, Big Day Zohov. So Rashi and Chumash quotes from the Gemara, 1 pasuk is out of order. Why did the Rebbeinu Shalom put the 1 pasuk out of order? Rav Soloveitchik said, because to teach us this lesson, Yom Kippur is the holiday of Torah Shabbat Peh. If you don't follow the Torah Shabbat Peh, if you follow the way it says in Chumash, you'll be makruh with the Karbanos in the wrong order. You'll only do the Avodah in 3 units. And you have to divide it up, it has to be done in 5 units. So the Chumash B'davke, the Rebbeinu Shalom dictated the Chumash to Moshe Rabbeinu, write it in such a way that it's misleading, that if people will only follow the Torah Shabbat Peh, only follow the Torah Shabbat Peh, there won't be Yotze the Karbanos. You have to do it the way the Torah Shabbat Peh has the tradition. What exactly was the need for the Torah Shabbat Peh? So the Masechah Sofrim raises that question, and they point out, if you wouldn't have a Torah Shabbat Peh, I have to have a Torah Shabbat Peh. If you wouldn't have a Torah Shabbat Peh, you wouldn't be able to relate if everything would be etched in stone, so to speak, the luchas, everything would be etched in stone. You wouldn't be able to negotiate, you wouldn't be able to navigate, you wouldn't be able to apply the halachas, bizman hazeh. There were no air conditioners in the days of Matan Torah. There weren't no refrigerators, there weren't no fans, there weren't no electronic devices. So you have to have a Torah Sheba'al Peh, where in every generation the Chachamim try to figure out exactly what is the nature of the din. And over the generations, we apply the halachas and the chumash differently. That's the whole koach of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, to be able to apply the old halachas from the Torah to new situations. If everything would be just Torah Shebechsav, you wouldn't be able to budge, you wouldn't be able to move at all. So that's why there was a need. That's how the Masech is talking. That's why there was always a need for the Torah Sheba'al Peh. What are the 5 sections of the Torah Sheba'al Peh? So the Rambam in the Hakdama to the Pirush HaMishnayos, the Pirush HaMishnayos was written in Arabic, so those of us that don't know Arabic, so we use the Hebrew translation that's printed in the back of the Gemara Brachas, has the introduction to the Pirush HaMishnayos. The Rambam says the Mishnah contains the whole Torah Sheba'al Peh, and there are 5 parts. So the first part of Torah Sheba'al Peh is the halachas l'Moshe Misinah, that there's no way in the world to read it in between the lines. And he says it's a very short list. He's going to give you what his opinion is, the full list of all of the halachas l'Moshe Misinah. Very short list. So on the bottom of the page, in all the editions of the Gemara, they tell you, look in such and such a sefer, that the Yeska Kasha there are 3 times as many. But the Rambam left out so many Gemaras. So the Netziv has in here, the Netziv, when he was a teenager, learning in Volozhin, at the end of his life, he was the Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin for 39 years. But when he was a teenager, he was sitting and writing a commentary on the Shiltas, on Einfall. How many people look in the Shiltas? Not so many people use it. But Tosfos quotes the Shiltas every so often. So he wrote a commentary on Shiltas. It's interesting. He had a brother-in-law, Hershel Schachter, is married to the Netziv's sister. He also wrote a commentary on the Shiltas at the same time, independent of each other. Each one wrote. The Hershel Schachter never printed his. The Netziv printed his. So the Netziv wrote, he printed his commentary on the Shiltas in 3 volumes. And he wrote, in the beginning of each one of the 3 volumes, he wrote a general introduction to all of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and it's a little bit of an introduction to the Sefer of the Shiltas. Shiltas was written in the days of the Gaonim. The one who wrote the Shiltas was not one of the Gaonim. The name of the yeshiva was Yeshiva's Gaon Yaakov, the pride of the Jewish people. And the president of the yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva, was called Rosh Yeshiva's Gaon Yaakov. They used to call him the Kitzur, the Gaon. Some of them are great Gaonim, big Talmid Chacham. Some of them are great fundraisers. That's the main job of the Rosh Yeshiva. Like the president of the university is supposed to be a good fundraiser. Some of them were neither Gaonim nor fundraisers. They were not so successful. So the Shiltas lived in the days of the Gaonim, but he was never the Rosh Yeshiva. So it's from the period of the Gaonim. They call him Rav Achoy Gaon out of respect, but he was a great Gaon to learn. He was never the head of the yeshiva. So it's interesting. Now Mosad Rav Kook put together the Netziv when he published the 3 volumes of his commentary on the Shiltas. So he wrote a long introduction to all of Torah Sheba'al Peh in installments. So the first installment is printed in the first volume of his commentary on the Shiltas, second installment in the second volume, third installment in the third volume. Now they put all the 3 together. So now you can get it, they sell it separately. The introduction to Torah Sheba'al Peh. He has very fascinating. He comes to defend the Rambam. How come the Rambam has such a short list of halachas l'Moshe Misinah? It should be 3 times as long. So he points out, if you look carefully, whenever the Gemara says Hilchas HaGemiri Law, so Rashi and Tosfos always translate that means halacha l'Moshe Misinah. The Rambam never says, whenever the Gemara Hilchas HaGemiri Law, the Rambam will be careful, he'll write, Pi HaShmuel Lamdu. The tradition has it. When the Gemara says halacha l'Moshe Misinah, the Rambam writes halacha l'Moshe Misinah. When the Gemara says Hilchas HaGemiri Law, the Rambam will write Pi HaShmuel Lamdu. What it means is the din was established centuries ago, and we don't remember what the derivation is. But it does mean it's halacha l'Moshe Misinah. So according to the Rambam, the list of halachas l'Moshe Misinai is only 1/3 what we usually assume. We usually follow Rashi and Tosfos that every time it's Hilchos HaGemiri Law, it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. That's how the Netziv defends the Rambam. Says you look in the Rambam, you see that he's very careful. So the Rambam has the first part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Second part is Perushim HaMekubalim l'Moshe Misinai. In every language there are certain expressions that if you look in the dictionary on each one of the words and the expression, in English language you have like that, if you look up every word and you put all 3 together, it doesn't add up to that phrase. I remember years ago there used to be a movie about the Second World War, that when the American Army was sending messages from America to Europe, where the soldiers were fighting, so they had to send the messages in code, but they were afraid that the Nazis would be able to crack the code. And they kept on cracking the code all the time. So then they finally decided they're going to send a message in code using American expressions that the Germans never heard of. So they used English words. If you look up each word in the dictionary, it doesn't add up to what they wanted. And the Germans wouldn't know these expressions in English. I remember there was a movie about that years ago. I don't know if it was true, but that's what the theme of the movie was. So there are Pirushim HaMekubalim and Moshe Misim. There are certain Pesukim in the Chumash. Ayin Tachas Ayin. Ayin Tachas Ayin sounds like it's an eye for an eye. The Rambam says, we never paskin like that. The base midrash shal Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu paskin didn't tell Yeshua ben Nun. They never took it literally. It was always understood that it's an expression. It's the Hebrew expression that means you have to pay money, and so on. Then the Rama has the third part of Torah Shabbat Peh, or the halachas that are derived by reading in between the lines, all the Yud Gimel Midas Shatar and the Dreshes Ben. But there are more than Yud Gimel Midas. How come the Pasuk sometimes speaks in singular, sometimes in plural, sometimes it switches from masculine to feminine, sometimes you have the same parsha written in two places in the Chumash, the same din, with slight variations, all the various Midas Shatar and the Dreshes Ben. Then the Rama has another two, the fourth and the fifth sections of the Torah Shabbat Peh, are all the dinim de Rabbanon, are part of the Torah Shabbat Peh. The Rambam says all the gzeiros de Rabbanon, that min HaTorah, you're not allowed to have meat and milk if they were cooked together. If it's just eating them mixed together, that's only prohibited mid Rabbanon. So that's gzeira mid Rabbanon. Then you have takanas mid Rabbanon. Gzeiros are like a mitzvah, lo yisaseh, an issa de Rabbanon, and then you have a takana de Rabbanon, it's a mitzvah mid Rabbanon. It's a mitzvah to read Mikra and Megillah, a mitzvah to light Neres Chanukah, and so on, all the mitzvahs mid Rabbanon. So the Rambam includes all the dinim de Rabbanon as part of the Torah Shabbat Peh. It sounds from the Rambam that it blends them to become part of the Torah Shabbat Peh min HaTorah. The obligation to light Neres Chanukah and the obligation to listen to Mikra, Megillah, Chanukah, and Purim is only with the Rabbanon. But it becomes a Chefetz Shaltar, becomes an integral part of the Torah Shabbat Peh min HaTorah. So when one studies the Gemaras, and one studies the dinim in the Shulchan Aruch about Mikra, Megillah, Halachas, Neres Chanukah, one is in fulfillment of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah min HaTorah. It's not only Talmud Torah min the Rabbanon. For many years, many of you may be familiar with this. For many years, Rav Soloveitchik used to give a shiur for Balabatim in New York City in Gemara Brachas. It took him over 11 years. He only gave a shiur once a week on a Tuesday night. So people businessmen, now they come into New York, they always know you have to be in New York on Tuesday night to be able to attend Rav Soloveitchik's shiur. So I remember it took him over, I was there the last few years. I was in high school and college in the early years. And then after I finished college, I didn't have to do any homework. I used to go to the Tuesday night shiur. So after spending so many years learning brachas, Rav Soloveitchik once made a comment. Someone could raise a question, why do we spend so much time on brachas? Most of the dinim in Gemara brachas are midrabbanon. All the brachas are all midrabbanon, except for Kiddush and brachas HaMazon. All the other brachas are midrabbanon. So it's really bittul Torah on the level of the Raisa. It's only Talmud Torah midrabbanon. Maybe we should have studied Gemara Menachos and Gemara Zvachim. The Ruba, most of the Gemaras and Zvachim Menachos are dinim de Raisa, and a little bit thrown in dinim de Rabbanon. So we would have had more Talmud Torah de Raisa. And they say the Rav Davo and Soloveitchik thought like that when you study dinim de Rabbanon, it's bittul Torah midiraisa, it's only Talmud Torah midirabbanon. So Rav Soloveitchik said he doesn't think that that's correct. All the dinim de Rabbanon blend in to become part of the Torah Shabbat Peh on the level of the Raisa. Rabban Leib Steinman, who wrote a whole sefer about Brisk, interesting, he was born a Brisk. And he remembered Rab Chaim, I think he writes he was 6 years old, Rab Chaim passed away, and he was a next door neighbor of Rab Elvo Soloveitchik. He writes all his zechronos. He remembered the Dyer of Simcha Zelig Rieger, whose son taught in YU, he used to teach Tanakh in YU. So he has all the zechronos from Brisk. So he quotes that Rab Elvo Soloveitchik said like that when you study Dinim de Rabbanon, it's bittul Torah min HaTorah, it's only Talmud Torah min Rabbanon. He thinks that it's not correct. So Rav Soloveitchik taught for sure it's not correct. All the Dinim de Rabbanon blend in to be part of the Torah Shabbat Peh min HaTorah. And that's probably the reason why the Gemara has a klal called the Tikkun Rabbanon. Came the Raisa Tikkun. Whenever the Chachamim introduce a Din de Rabbanon, they have to the building blocks of all the dinim d'Rabbanan have to be concepts that exist on the level of deraisa. If you want all the dinim d'Rabbanan to blend to be part of the Torah Shebaal Peh, you have to use building blocks that exist on the level of deraisa. And it's interesting, once in a while the Gemara will prove, Rabbi Chana Wasserman has an essay about it. Rabbi Chana has a sefer on Yevamos that everybody uses, Kovetz Ha'aretz. So in the sefer on Yevamos he shows there's a Gemara Baba Basra in the second parak, an obscure little Gemara. The Gemara is raising a question, what's a din deraisa on a certain issue. The Gemara proves what's the din deraisa by quoting a din d'Rabbanan. How can you prove what the din deraisa by quoting a din d'Rabbanan? Rabbi Chana said that's the reason why, because we assume called the tikkun Rabbanan, Kain deraisa tikkun, all the dinim d'Rabbanan were patterned after dinim deraisa. You always have to look for where is the din deraisa. Just an example we mentioned yesterday in one of the groups. There's a din d'Rabbanan. You're not permitted to ask Amir l'Nochri. You're not permitted to ask a non-Jew to do malacha for you on Shabbos. It's only d'Rabbanan, and that's why the Gemara has a whole list of kulas and Amir l'Nochri. So is there such a din on the level of deraisa? And the answer is yes. There's a pasuk in Haseres Adibus. Amir l'Nochri, if I ask a non-Jew who's a ger toshav to do a malacha for me, that's an issa deraisa. Because it says in Haseres Adibus, Lasasik ha-malacha al tevlich chavitecha v'ger chashe b'sharecha. If he's really a convert, and he's included in Atta doesn't only mean the people who stood at Har Sinai. Everybody today who's by mitzvah is Atta. What does it say? Bincha b'techa, if the children are by mitzvah, they're included in Atta. So Rashi and Chumash quotes from the Tana, and what's bincha b'techa? Children before by mitzvah. Children before by mitzvah are permitted to do malacha, but the parents are not allowed to ask him to do malacha for them. So ger chashe b'sharecha refers to the ger toshav. A Jew is not permitted to ask a ger toshav to do malacha for him. So pattern after that din, that's an Haseres Adibus. Pattern after that, the Chachamim they extended the din, and they said Amir l'Nochri is prohibited even if the fellow is not a ger toshav. That was one of the recurrent themes in Rav Soloveitchik's shiurim all the years. He'd always, whenever there's a din d'Rabbanan, he'd always try to research it to try to figure out what is the din d'Oraisa that this is patterned after, and would always come up with fascinating chidushim. Many chidushim. The Gemara in Gittin, in Perek HaNizokin, has a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and his student Rabbi Elazar, whether Rov HaTorah is Torah Shebechsav, or Rov 51%. What is the majority of all the Kol HaTorah Kul? Is it Torah Shebechsav or Torah Shebaal Peh? So the Pri Megadim has a Psich HaKalah in the beginning of Orach Chaim. They printed the Pri Megadim's general introduction to Torah Shebaal Peh. He labels it Psich HaKalelis L'Orach Chaim, a general introduction to Orach Chaim. But it's not just the general introduction to Orach Chaim, it's all of Torah Shebaal Peh. So he starts off with this comment. How can there be a dispute in the Gemara in Gittin whether Rav Torah is Bechsav or Rav Torah Baal Peh? Look at any bookcase. The Torah Shebechsav is only 24 svarim. You have the Chamishu Chamshi Torah. Then the Nevi'im and the Ksudim. The whole thing is Esmer Abba, 24 svarim. Torah Shebaal Peh is Arucham Eretz Midah, Rechavim Miniyam. The Mishnayos and the Toseftas and the Bavli and the Yerushalmi and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, everything, all the Rishonim, everything is Torah Shebaal Peh. How can there be a question whether Rav Torah is Bechsav or Rav Torah is Baal Peh? So the Pri Megadim quotes, there's a Sefer Be'er Sheva, which was written in the early 1600s. Be'er Sheva has on Hariyas, so he raises this question, how is it possible? So he says the truth of the matter is that the Rov of Kol HaTorah Kula is really the dinim that were established based on drashas by reading in between the lines, using the Yud Gimel Mina Shatar and the drashas, and that's exactly the machlokes of Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. When you have a drasha of the Torah Shebaal Peh that's based on reading in between the lines, since it's based on the text of the Chumash, so do you treat that like Torah Shebechsav, or do you say no? Since you're reading in between the lines, it doesn't really say it in the text. That's treated like Torah Shebaal Peh. And what's the big difference, whether you treat it as Torah Shebechsav or Torah Shebaal Peh? So the Pri Megadim quotes the Rambam in Hilchas Treifas. The pasuk in Chumash says, "Basa basoda treifa lo sachelu." You're not allowed to eat. What does it mean, basa basoda treifa? If the simple pshat in the pasuk, the Rambam says there are 7 different kinds of treifas. So one of the treifas is a drusa, an animal. Those are no Hilchas Shchita. There's a din of drasa. That's a different thing. Shia drasa chala the hagrama v'ika. The chamish Hilchas Shchita. Drasa is one thing, but drusa is a different thing. If an animal let's say a sheep was clawed by a bigger animal by the neck, and it scratched the neck and it was bleeding, so that animal may become a drusa. So the Rambam says the Pshuto Shon Mikra is talking about drusa, that treifa. But the Torah Shabbal Peh says that included, that's Basa Basora treifa. It was attacked by a ferocious animal, by a bigger animal. But the Torah Shabbal Peh says also included in the prohibition of treifa is that there's a sirch on the lung, it has a broken leg. That's not basara. That's not basa basara treifa lo sachelo. The Torah Shabbal Peh says that too is included. So the Rambam says, therefore, we have to be machmir more by the drusa, because that's pshuto shon mikra. Whatever is pshuto shon mikra is more chomer than whatever is only Torah Shabbal Peh. And the Pri Megadim quotes many marmakaimis to demonstrate that. Take, for example, if a person is b'sakana, let's say the Jews in the concentration camp, they were fed non-kosher food, they were fed treifa food. But if they're not going to eat the food, they're going to die. They may die anyway, but you have to try to extend your life as much as possible. So most of the Rabbanim said that they should eat the non-kosher food. There was a debate at the time whether this was a shas hashmad against the Jewish religion, or just Hitler wanted to wipe out the Jewish race. It was a shas hashmad against the Jewish religion, shas kzeres hashmad. Then you're not allowed to eat treifus even to save your life. There's no head to pikof nefesh. So the Rabbanim, most of the Rabbanim at the time felt that it's just Hitler wants to wipe out the Jewish race. It wasn't against the Jewish religion. After the war was all over, and then they had the records from the Reichstag, from the Congress, from the German Congress, that they had on record that Hitler gave a speech, and he said, this is not just a war against the Jewish people, it's a war against the God of the Jewish people. He's a goody-goody God, it's a goody-goody religion, and he doesn't like that. He likes power and force and strength. So it may turn out that the Rabbanim were wrong. It may turn out that it wasn't a Gzeres Hashmat, that he wanted to fight against the Jewish religion. But at the time, the Rabbanim didn't know that, so they just thought that he wants to wipe out the Jewish race. He killed a lot of minorities. He killed the Albanians, he killed the Gypsies, he killed other minorities as well, not just the Jewish people. So that's why the Rabbanim thought it wasn't Gzeres Hashmat against the Jewish people. So we had a din. Let's say a person has to eat non-kosher food in order to save his life. So Pikuach Nefesh allows you. You have to eat the non-kosher food. What if you have a choice? I can either eat this non-kosher food or that non-kosher food. The Gemara has in the end of Maseches Yuma a long discussion. If you can save your life by either doing one avera or the other, they're both treif. But one is more asa than the other. If I eat chelev or dam, it's an isa kares. If I eat tevel, it's only misa b'dei shamayim. Chorus is worse than misa b'dei shamayim. Chorus, officially the person should die before the age of 50. Misa b'dei shamayim should officially die before the age of 60. A lot of times there are people on Mechal Shabbos b'mezid, b'farhesia, and they live until 95 years old. So Tosfos asked Akasha what happened to the din of Chorus. So they say maybe he gave charity, maybe he gave stoken, maybe he had schusim, whatever, but in principle, the idea of Chorus is that one dies at the age of 50, before 50, Misa Deshamayim died before the age of 60. So the Isa Chorus is considered a Mohamedek Avera than an Isa B'dei Shamayim. Or let's say something for some Einish, there's Misa, one Einish, there's only Malchus. So the Avera for which there's a death penalty is considered more serious than the Avera for which there's only a Malchus. The Gemara establishes which Avera is Mohammed and which based on what the Onshim are. So if you have a possibility to have Pikuach Nefesh save your life by doing a lesser Avera, doing a Mohammedik Avera, so you have to do the Kalakal Tchila. You have to do the lesser Avera. So the Mishnah has the same thing. Let's say Kohanim are not permitted to be Metamil Mesim. But if there's a Meis Mitzvah, there's a Jewish dead body, and no one is being Betapel and Nikvura, so the Kohanim are permitted and obligated to take care of it. Today, if he has a cell phone, let him call up someone else, tell someone else to come to bury the Meis. In the days of the Talmud, there were no cell phones, so the Kohen is walking on a highway, and there's nobody else around, and he finds a dead Jewish body, so he has to be Metapel, has to bury the Meis Mitzvah. What if you have a Kohen and a Kohen Gadol walking on the highway, and you don't need both of them, and they bump into a Meis Mitzvah? You don't need both of them in order to bury him. One can dig the grave and move the mace and bury him all by himself. So which of the two should be Metame? So the prohibition of the Kohen Gadol not to be Metame Mesim is more serious then the prohibition of the Kohen Hedyot. The Kohen Hedyot is permitted and obligated to be Metamei if one of the 7 relatives dies. Not only Meis Mitzvah, the Kohen Gadol is only permitted to be Metamei L'Meisim. If it's a Meis Mitzvah, the Kohen Gadol is not Metamei to the 7 relatives. So if you have a Kohen and a Kohen Gadol walking on the highway, let the Kohen violate the Yisur Tumah. Hakal Hakal Tchila. Don't ask the Kohen Gadol to be Metamei. What if you have a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir walking on the highway and they bump into a Meis Mitzvah? They both have exactly the same level of din, that they're both not allowed to be Metamei L'Meisim even to 7 relatives, and they both are permitted and obligated to be Metamei to a Meis Mitzvah. So which of the 2 of them has the Macham Din? So that's a Machlekes Hatanaim in the Mishnah. Machlekes Abelaz and the Chachamim, and the Gemara has a long discussion. How do you establish which of the 2 is Machamer, which of the 2 is Markal? But we have the Klal, Hakal Hakal Tchila. So the Talmud Yerushalmi, Maseches Nazir, has the following discussion. What if you have a Nazir? There's a parsha in the Chumash. A person accepts Hareni Nazir. He accepts to be a Nazir, so he has to observe Naziris for at least 30 days. If he says, I want to be a Nazir for 100 days, so he wants to be a Nazir for 10 years, be a Nazir for 10 years, but a minimum of 30 days. And then there's a Nazir Olam. A person accepts upon himself, I want to be a Nazir for the rest of my life, so it has special dinim there. That doesn't appear in Chumash anywhere. There's such a thing as a Nazir Olam. And every 30 days he wants to take a haircut, so he brings karbanos, the whole story is all Torah Shabbat Peh. So if you have, the Yerushalmi says if you have a Nazir and you have a Nazir Olam walking down the highway and they both bump into a Meis Mitzvah, which of the 2 should be Metamei? So the Talmud Yerushalmi says the Nazir Olam is only Torah Shabbat Peh. The Nazir is Torah Shebechsav. Whatever din is in Torah Shebechsav is Machomer than a din that's Torah Shabbat Peh. We assume the Kabbalah form right, that Torah Shebechsav was given with Midas Hadin, and Torah Shemal Peh was given with Midas Harachmim, to be soft like it. And the example is Ayin Tachas Ayin. The simple reading of the pasuk sounds like it's an eye for an eye. Torah Shemal Peh says, no, they never meant that from day number 1. Not that they changed the din. In the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, they never observed that din kipshuto. Torah Shemal Peh says we don't follow that. It's an expression, that means you pay mammon. So the Torah Shebechsav, we assume, is always given with Midas Hadin, more strict. The Torah Shabbat Peh, the Midas HaRachman. There's such a Rosh, a famous Rosh in Bava Kama. The students who learn Bava Kama know, in the second parak in Bava Kama, Rabbi has a suffix it's a little complicated, Tzvuris, whether Kercha Kegufa, Kercha Lav Kegufa. So the Gemara says Rabbi had a suffix, and after he had the suffix for a while, he was Peshe, the Kercha Kegufa. So usually, when the Gemara has such a case, Rabbi had a suffix, and then he found the pasuk, he found the Mishnah, he found the Brisa, came up with the Svara. Here the Gemara just says Rabbi had a suffix, and then he was poshed the suffix after years. He decided one way. How did he decide? How was he poshed the suffix? The Gemara never says how. So the Rosh explains, because we have a klal, we don't know where he got the klal from. The Rosh says we have a klal. Every halacha Moshe Messina is lahakel. So the Mekubalim say that's the reason why, because Torah Shabbat Peh was intended to be given the Midas HaChesed, the Midas HaRach, Torah Shebechsav, the Midas HaDin. So that's what we assume, that all the dinim that are Torah Shebechsav are considered more serious, more chomer, than the dinim that are Torah Shabbat Peh. So in that case, the Yerushalmi says, if you have the Nazir and the Nazir Olam are walking on the highway, they bump into a Meis Mitzvah, let the Nazir Olam be Metamei, because he's only a Nazir based on Torah Shabbat Peh, as opposed to a real Nazir is based on Torah Shabbat. That's a Mochamed Digadin. Every so often the Gemara will say, Milsa Da'asya, the Kal B'chayma, Torach V'kosav L'kro. It didn't, we could have established, we could have figured it out on our own, based on a Kal B'chayma. Kal B'chayma is one of the Yugim and B'ida Shatar and the Bresh Ben. So nonetheless, the Pasuk wrote it explicitly. So why did the Pasuk write it unnecessarily, if you would have been able to figure out that din anyway? So the Mefarshim explain why, because whatever is based on a Kal B'chayma is only Torah Shabbat Peh. So Torah Shabbat Peh is not going to be that chomer. Torah L'Kosav L'Kro, the Chumash made it into Torah Shabbat Peh, so it's Mocham. It's going to be Mocham now. That is Torah Shabbat. The Rambam writes, you don't get Malchus. Rashi writes the same. Rashi and the Rambam both write the same. You don't get Malchus if you violate an Isser that's only known through Torah Shabbat Peh. You only get Malchus if you violate an Avera that's similar to Lo Sachsam Shor B'Dishoy. The Gemara said because in Chumash Dvarim Darshan Smuchim. And the rest of the Chumash, you only darshan a hekah. Hekah means if you have two dinim written in the same pasuk, we assume there's a connection between the two. What if you have two dinim written and two psukim that are adjacent to each other? Do you assume that there's a connection? So there's a dispute in the Gemara. So the Gemara comes to the conclusion, we paskin only in Chumash Dvarim. Chumash Dvarim, the Gemara says, why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, before he passed away, started to transmit the whole Torah Shabbat Peh to Bnei Yisrael. So he said one din, then by association that reminded him of another din, he said the other din, and by association that reminded him of another din, and another din, and another din. So the whole Chumash Dvarim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu dictated Dvarim to Moshe Rabbeinu, but he told him, write it in the same order that you presented it Baal Peh. So there's a connection, there's always association between the first din and the second din and the third din. So we only darshan Smuchim and Chumash Dvarim. There are many famous dinim that are based on Smuchim and Chumash Dvarim. Many famous dinim throughout the whole Chumash Dvarim. So one of the many famous dinim is the whole third parak and Malchus, Elohein HaLoikin. Who gets Malchus? Whoever violates an Aveira, that's similar to L'Sachs Mishor B'Disha. You're not allowed to muzzle an animal when it's working on food. Where'd they come up with that? Because the two psukim are one next to the other. It says, if the person is a Rasha, he deserves Malchus. What Rasha? When Rasha? Whoever you don't like, you call him a Rasha. Whoever belongs to the Turikarta calls us Rishon, we call them Rishon. Everybody gets Malchus. So the pasuk has next to the pasuk L'Sachs Mishor B'Disha. So the Gemara establishes that's the whole theme of the third parak in Malchus. Whoever violates an aver that's similar to L'Sachs Mishor B'Disha gets Malchus. So the Gemara says it has to say the lab. How do you know if it's similar to L'Sachs Mishor B'Disha? It has to say either lo, like L'Sachs Mishor B'Disha, or Hishama Pen Bial. If there's no pasuk at all, the whole din is only known through halacha Moshe B'Sinai. So it's not dumya de L'Sachs Mishor B'Disha. So you don't get Malchus on. That's what Rashi and the Rambam both say like that. Not only do we assume that the building blocks of dinim derabanan should be concepts that exist on the level of the Raisa, called the Tikkun Rabbanan Kain, the Raisa Tikkun, because otherwise the dinim derabanan won't be able to blend in with the rest of the Torah Shabbat Peh. We assume also that Taz has this famous comment when the Chachamim want to make a Gzera derabanan. They made a Gzera derabanan when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. You don't blow shofar because the concern everyone is Mechuyev with Tkiyah Shofar. For sure, someone's going to forget and they're going to carry the shofar on Shabbos. So we tell all the Jews in the world, don't blow shofar. Midirabbanan, they're not telling you Mechuyev to blow shofar. Even Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. Midirabbanan, they say, don't blow shofar on Shabbos because we're afraid that a few people, if they'd only be afraid once every 100 years, 5 Jews are going to be Mechal Shabbos. That's a Milsa de Lashkecha de Gazbabban. They have the right to make a Gzeir de Rabbanan if it's an insignificant chashash. But if it's a serious chashash, then they have to make a Gzeir de Rabbanan. So the Taz quotes from his father-in-law, from the Bach, the famous kasha, they should have prohibited Tkiyah Shofar even Rosh Hashanah falls out on a weekday. It's Mashmiya Kol. You're not allowed to play piano on Shabbos and Yom Tov. You're not allowed to blow a bugle. So you shouldn't be allowed to blow shofar. It's Mashmiya Kol. So the Taz quotes from the Bach, he quotes in a few places. In Shulchan Aruch, many Rishonim talk about this. It's a major dispute in Rishonim. Many say the Chacham have no ability to make a Gezer D'Rabbanan Keneged Dover HaMafurish B'Torah. They can't do away with the mitzvah. It says in the Chumash, why not? All the Dinim D'Rabbanan have to blend in to become part of the Torah Shabbat Peh. This can't blend in. It's impossible. It doesn't say explicitly in the Chumash that you have to blow shofar even Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. But it's self-understood. So that, they do have a right to make a Gzeir. Don't blow shofar, Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos. It's not explicit in the Chumash. But to do away with the whole Tkiyah Shofar, that they don't have power, that they don't have authority to do. So just like you have Dinim D'Rabbanan blend in to be part of the Torah Shabbat Peh, and every time they make a Takana D'Rabbanan or a Gzeira D'Rabbanan, they have to make sure that it can blend in. The building blocks have to be ideas that exist on the level of the Raisa. So too Minhagim. A minig is binding Midirabbanan, Mitam Neder. Minatorah Neder in the Shvuah is only binding if you do like it says in the Chumash, Nefesh Kisishava Levate Bishosaim. You have to pronounce it with your lips. Person makes up his mind. He's not going to eat potato chips anymore. He has to go on a diet. He made up his mind, but he never said it. If you don't say it, then it's not binding. But there are a few exceptions to the rule. So one exception to the rule is tzedakah. There's a big machlokes that the Psak and Shulchan Aruch and Yeridea and Hilchas Tzedakah and Choshen Mishpat, it says if they make an appeal in the shul, the person made up his mind. He was so moved by the appeal, he's going to give $1,000. That was on Shabbos morning. Then on Sunday morning he has to make out the check. He decides to make it $100, make it $18. So since he made up his mind, if he just had a fleeting thought, maybe give $1,000, maybe give $100, maybe give $5,000, keeps on going back and forth, he never made up his mind, the hechlet. So that's not called, he's not bound by the fleeting thought, maybe he'll give $1,000. But if he made up his mind, he's going to give $1,000, then he can change his mind, even though he never had Levat this sign. So that's a din. Tzedakah has the same din as Hegdish. Hegdish is a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. Pasuk in Divrei Hayamim says, Kol nediv lei b'olos hadil. Those who had pledged in their heart to bring a korban olam, brought the korban. So Hegdish is chal b'machshava, and Tzedakah is chal b'machshava. That's been a Torah. And then the Gemara says, Midirabanan, whenever the person makes up his mind, he wants to observe a minute toiv, he wants to walk. When the chazan walks with the Sefer Torah, he's going to baglate the Sefer Torah, he's going to walk behind the chazan. So if he does it once and he plans to continue to do it like that, or he does it 3 times in a row, not thinking one way or the other, so then we assume he demonstrates that that's the pattern that he wants to go. So if a person accepts upon himself a hanhoga teva, you have to consult the Rabbanim, what's considered a hanhoga teva. Sometimes what we think is a hanhoga teva is stupidity. It's a minik shtus. That's the Taisus on the first Mishnah in Baba Basra. If it's a minik shtus, then you don't apply this din. We mentioned yesterday, I think we were talking about it. The Rabbi Tam has a tshuva where he writes that the word minhag is spelled man nun hey gimel, the same letters as Gehenna. Gimel hey nun man. If you observe the minig, it goes straight to Gehenna. So it depends what the minig is. If it's a stupid minig, then it's stupid. It's not binding. If you have a minig taif, if the Rabbanim approve of it, minig taif. So minig also, Taisus has the expression, minig Yisrael Toirahu. What way? You want the minhagim to blend in with the din of deraisa also. When you say minig shtus, it doesn't mean the minig doesn't have a good explanation. All the minhagim have beautiful explanations. A minig shtus means a minig that you're not being mekayim anything. If you'll observe the minig, there is no kiyam mitzvah. Let's say there's a minig, an old minig from the days of the Gemara, that you wait 6 hours in between fleishiks and the milk. Some people wait 3 hours, 1 hour, whatever the minig is. That's a minig. That's not a real din. So there's more room to be makel in a minig than a real din of the Rabban to have fleishiks and milchiks together. If it was cooked together, then it's an isa deraisa. If you're eating together, it wasn't cooked together, that's an isa derabban. But the fact that you have to wait 3 hours or 6 hours, that's only a minig, and therefore there's more room to be makel on a minig. So that minig is a fulfillment of a din deraisa, even though you're not quick. That's a fulfillment of the din. Ushmatem is mishmati, asum mishmaris mishmati. Torah says each person, or the chachamim, should make gzeras depending on your circumstance. It depends what you do for a living, what country you live in, what's your society. Sometimes you have to be mekabel on yourself harchokis and siogim that the chachamim never introduced in the days of Gemara. They never had that concern. We do have the concern. So there's such a din in the pasuk, ushmatem is mishmati. So whatever the chachamim or guys in the Gemara, that's binding on all the generations, on the Jews and all societies. But if a person finds himself in a situation where he may violate a din because of the society that he lives in, so then he has to make a harchaka for himself. So all of those harchakas that one observes is really a kiyum of the din of mishmatem is mishmati. But if you just have a minig, it's not a fulfillment of anything. It has a good reason, but it's not really a kiyum of any din deraisa, din derabban, not that you're choshesh for a certain opinion. So such minhagim are not binding. In every generation, the Rabbanim always restudy all of the minhagim to determine whether the minhagim still make sense, or whether the minhagim have a kiyum or not. We have a principle regarding dinim de Rabbanim. Whenever the Chachamim made a gzera de Rabbanim for a specific reason, even if you live in a generation where the reason no longer applies, that's davish of the minyan, tzaf minyan achal hater. You have to have a bezin later to be mater, to undo the din de Rabbanim. I mean, Hagim, you don't have such a klal. If you have a minig, and the whole reason for the minig falls apart, so the whole minig falls apart automatically. Take, for example, one example. I live in Washington Heights with all of the Yekins. So Rabbi Schwab, for a while, was the rabbi in the Breuer's community, together with Rabbi Breuer. And after Rabbi Breuer passed away, he was a rabbi for a few years, till he passed away. So there used to be a minig in Germany and in Hungary that they wouldn't eat chicken on Pesach, only flesh. Why wouldn't they eat chicken on Pesach? Because they used to feed grain to the chickens, and they would sometimes chef the chicken before it had a chance to digest the grain in the stomach. and then they would cook the whole chicken in a pot. Then, with the stomach, nobody does that today, they would cook the whole chicken in a pot. Then sometimes they would cook on Pesach, then they would find the kernel of grain was never digested with the enzymes inside the stomach. And you cooked the kernel of grain with hot water, you made it into chametz. So the chametz on Pesach is b'mashahu, it's not bottle b'shishim, so they have to throw out the whole chicken. Then they have to kasher the pot. They have to Pesach, no, you can't kasher the pot on Pesach. So that's why they developed a minhag that you don't eat chicken on Pesach. So Rav Schwab said that whole minhag falls apart b'zman hazeh for two reasons. First of all, nobody cooks the chicken with the stomach inside today. They take out the stomach. Number two, nobody feeds grain to the chickens anymore. They feed corn on the cob. It's much less expensive. The grain is much too expensive. So he said, since the whole reason for the minhag doesn't apply, the whole minhag doesn't apply. The Ramah has such a tshuva, the tshuva Samar. Rab Chaim always has such a tshuva. Not about the chicken on Pesach, they talk about minhagim. Whenever there's a minhag, and the whole reason for the minhag no longer applies, minhag falls apart. But on Dinim de Rabbanan, we're more strict. We say whenever the Chachamim introduce a Takana Rabbanan, the Takana is binding even in a generation when the whole reason doesn't apply, until you have a bezdin to declare otherwise. Many fascinating details regarding Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Torah Sheba'al Peh has made it possible for the Jewish people, for the Rabbanim, to relate the Torah to modern situations. If everything would just be Torah Sheba'al, it would be, like we use in English, the expression etched in stone. You wouldn't be able to negotiate, you wouldn't be able to navigate, you wouldn't be able to relate the old dinim to modern society. But because of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, where we analyze what's the nature of the din, so that if you have a case that's sufficiently similar, so then you apply that din. That's what the whole Shabbos of Tshuvas, V'Rivichim is all about. They try to ascertain how did the dinim in the Gemara applied Bizman Hazeh. Are the situations sufficiently similar that the same din in the Gemara applies Bizman Hazeh? Or the world keeps on changing. Maybe the situation is so different, you have to apply a different din. So Shavuot we celebrate Kabbalah's Torah Shebechsav. Yom Kippur we celebrate Kabbalah's Torah Sheba'al Peh. It was after Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Lucha Shniyos that the Rebbeinu Shalom introduced this section of the Torah, the main part of the Torah is the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And it's only through the Torah Sheba'al Peh that we're able to apply the dinim, the ancient dinim from centuries ago, to modern situation. Thank you very much.